welcome to Crimes and Times. You can't turn on the TV these days without hearing about Russia. Everything is coming up Russia, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Paul Manfort, his indictment, the George Papadopoulos guilty plea, and all the other players in the Russian collusion investigation. We have a very special guest with us tonight, and I'm very grateful to have him here. We have Mark Zaid, a DC-based attorney who specializes in international affairs and transactions and national security. He's also an adjunct professor at at Johns Hopkins University, where he teaches national security and global studies. He's also the founder and executive director of the James Madison Project, which, Mark, I'm going to want to talk about at the end of the show. That's really
Sure.
a fascinating project. Mark, a few months ago, it was big news when we heard that a special prosecutor had been appointed for the Russia investigation. And then it was big news when we heard that the FBI did a no-knock search warrant at Manafort's house. And of course, we're on to even bigger news now. But my first question to you as an attorney, I'm thinking back when the no-knock warrant came. This was a day after they had an interview with Manafort, if I'm correct. Came the next day. And my question to you, if you were, I believe it was the next day, or at least very close in time, if your client spoke to the FBI one day, supposedly cooperating or being interviewed, and the next day was a subject of a no-knock search warrant, what would you be thinking?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had a case similar to this, in fact. And when this happened, I indeed went on MSNBC, on Morning Joe, to talk about this very same thing. I mean, the first thing is I'd be furious, especially if I had a client cooperating. And I had a case, it was a front page Washington Post story a few years ago. It was a CIA employee who was being investigated for potentially leaking classified information. And we were fully cooperating with the FBI. We went to the FBI field office in Washington, D.C. We sat down with them. We went through a list of documents and issues and classification matters they were concerned with. And one morning at like 6:30 in the morning, the FBI shows up at their house. Now, I think the distinction might have been in my case, I don't think it was a no-knock, because in the no-knock, like in Manafort, they actually were able to essentially break into the house. I mean, they picked the lock to come into the house. And the purpose is to make sure that the person doesn't destroy any records. So in my client's case, I believe they just knocked on the door and woke them up at 6:30 in the morning. I mean, a little bit, not a hell of a lot different, but if in fact they were cooperating, in my case, they found nothing. I mean, the case went nowhere. My client was never prosecuted, never going to be prosecuted. It was a joke of a case. But in Manafort's case, what happened, of course, now that we've seen the indictment, is statements he made to the FBI, they clearly didn't believe. And in fact, they proved that they didn't believe it because documentation that they found in his house, according to the charges at least, went to be contradictory to what he allegedly told them as far as documentation that he had with some of his offshore banking activities and dealings with Ukraine.
Exactly. Now, your first reaction was you'd be furious. Did you mean you'd be furious with your client or furious at the FBI?
No, I'd be furious with the FBI. And as I was, in the sense that, what are you doing? We've been cooperating the whole time. Now, hopefully, and I think, any lawyer who has dealt with criminal cases in particular has had clients lie to them. Now, I don't deal much with criminal cases. I get forced into it because the clients who I represent inside the intelligence community, law enforcement. So, I mean, I represent FBI agents. I represent CIA case officers. And every once in a while, those individuals, something happens that the allegations against them slip into the criminal context. So I might have a client who faces a security clearance issue about leaking classified information, and then it becomes a criminal investigation. And most of the time, we have to be cooperating with the government because it's an administrative process. So
clearly,
we're not.
I'm saying if Manafort had, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if Manafort had spoke to an attorney before he went in, certainly the attorney would have advised him against lying to the FBI. So he
Well,
clearly didn't tell an
certainly.
attorney or get good advice here.
Right. So I presume, for purposes of the lawyers, that the lawyers were not told the truth, or they didn't do a very good job about prepping their client or getting their client to be really careful. And, of course, if we know a client's going to lie, we can't
Right.
facilitate that, whether it's on the witness stand or even to the federal government, because lying to a federal official, especially an FBI agent, is a crime. 18
Yes, it is.
USC 1001 false statements.
Mhm.
And most of the cases that we see in classified leaks, in these types of, let's say, politically charged cases, almost always have a 1001 charge in them.
Right.
They're the easiest of these allegations or charges to assert.
Right. Now, as you know, I know you don't do much criminal work, but to get a no-knock warrant, I mean, we got them all the time when I was working narcotics in New York. But on a white-collar crime case, they really had to, they being the FBI, had to make a very compelling argument to a judge that they really thought evidence would be destroyed and that Manfort is a bad guy, that he would do that, right?
Yes, and I think that's the difference. When my client situation, where they showed up, was, like I said, not a no knock, but they just still show up, which is pretty normal at like 6:30 in the morning, because they expect people are probably still in bed.
Right.
And but I would still, in that one, I'd be damn concerned if I was his lawyer, as I'm sure he was after the FBI did that. But I would be furious, like I said, because here it was, we were cooperating. And, now fortunately different outcomes happen with my case. And so I can still be angry that, I think the FBI betrayed our trust because we were acting in good faith. In Manafort's case, if I was the lawyer, I'd be more, okay, how do I dig myself out of this? Because,
Right.
As I think people are going to see in this particular case, in fact, it's very black and white, much of it. I mean, the allegations against Manafort and Gates, it's not where there are these theories that the government has. There's,
Right.
okay, money went into this bank account. Do you have a bank record? Oh, look, yes, you do. And money went there. Oh, and here's a contract. So it's going to be much more difficult for them. Now, the lying issues, that can get into he said, she said, and that's a credibility issue with the FBI. But a lot of the charges against Manafort and Gates are paper. So
Right.
there's a paper trail, and it will be either yes or no. Which one is it?
Right. First I have to ask you a question. On your case, when you say you cooperated, there was no conviction. Did you? I mean, I'm sure you did review the affidavit. Was there strong probable cause there? Or do you think it was just not enough probable cause that probably should have ended up in a search warrant? In your
No, it's nothing.
opinion.
I'm trying to think back. I must have seen it. And they might even just let them in, and they confiscated. It was a narrow, targeted warrant, and I wasn't there when it happened. Sometimes I have been there when the FBI was rummaging through the house with a lawful warrant. In fact, I'd say in the two cases where I was directly involved most recently, neither of them ended up finding anything, and no charges were ever brought. In fact, this one case I had a few years ago with the Air Force, there was an Air Force intel officer who ended up writing a book. In fact, that was part of why he ended up getting investigated. And it was the first time I get people contacting me all the time who say the government's following them, surveilling them, targeting them, implanting devices into them. And, it's not. They're usually mentally ill, and sadly.
Right.
But this guy was contacting me, telling me the FBI was following him. And I'm like, yeah, right, sure. He's like, well, do you want to talk to the FBI agent? I'm like, yeah, sure. Put him on the phone. And sure enough, he puts him on the phone. And Mr. Zaid, this is Agent so-and-so. We are at the midst. We're getting a warrant from this judge. We will be at his house shortly. You're more than welcome to be there if you want to. I'm like, okay, this one's real.
Now, you brought up the indictment, which I got right here, and I'm reading it. And, it is just what I would expect from an FBI investigation, a DOJ indictment. I've done white collar. I've done these money laundering cases in both white collar and narcotics. And as you said here, the FBI has laid out their case, very, very strongly in this indictment. I'm sure you've read it. It's very cogent, very particular and detailed. And it's a white-collar crime case, a very clear audit trail, paper trail, money in, money out, bank account here, bank account there. I assume you looked at it, and I realize it's just an indictment. It's not a, it's not a conviction. It's one side, but looks like a pretty strong case, does it not?
No, it does. And obviously, everybody is innocent until proven guilty, and it is just an indictment with allegations. And it's easy to point to some of them, especially with some of the 1001 violations or allegations where, I don't know, and none of us really know necessarily what was said by the different sides. Plus, like I said, that's an easy charge for the FBI to throw in, or whichever agency. I mean, the IRS was involved as well, where they said that Manafort and his accountants and lawyers had lied on his behalf or for his behalf. But a lot of it, like we had just been discussing, is going to be very black or white. And I would hope in something as important as this, when you're frankly dealing with an investigation that at least not necessarily targets or implicates the president yet, but certainly surrounds the presidency, at least the campaign to become president. Mueller's, this isn't some prosecutor in the middle of nowhere or even a U.S. attorney in a smaller city. I mean, this is a special counsel by someone who used to be the director of the FBI and is one of the more respected law enforcement officers. His reputation is on the line, and if the allegation is a factual one, I presume and certainly would hope that it is what it is.
Right. Now, you brought up a great point that we're getting some questions in now from the audience, and segueing to what I wanted to ask you. So when Manafort gets indicted, the Trump administration very quick to come out and point out that these were actions he took not as part of the chairman of the campaign, but on his own. I remember Sean Spicer coming out and saying he played a minor role in the campaign, somewhat comical. But nevertheless, that is true. Nothing here does seem to implicate the president or the presidency. So how do you think, at least from what we see now, on Manafort and Gates as a minor player, how do you see this affecting, if at all, Trump as the president or the presidency itself?
Well, that is true. There's a tiny bit of factual overlap of some of the events, more peripheral than anything else, that at least went into 2016 when Manafort took over as the campaign manager. But it is obviously something that is still tied to Russia. And even if it doesn't necessarily implicate the president of the United States, it calls into question, obviously, the credibility of the people that he was surrounding himself with. And, I think many people who will talk about the cases, I don't like to speculate about what I think might be out there. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know what I know from either first or secondhand knowledge of clients who have been interviewed by the special counsel's office in a variety of different topics that they've been interviewing about. But, at least my own perception has probably been, or always has been, that first of all, collusion, the word that everybody keeps using, there is no such crime as collusion. So, yeah, even if President Trump and his inner circle colluded with Russia, that doesn't mean anything. Politically, it means a lot, but legally, it doesn't mean anything. Now, what comprised the collusion could implicate criminal activity that is prosecutable, but there is no crime of collusion. So, but what we do have, and what looks the most likely, is exactly what happened with Manafort and Gates. Financial crimes, conspiracies to commit financial crimes, money laundering, hiding assets, tax evasion, and false statements to the FBI. Right. Exactly what we would, what I think most of us who are kind of inside baseball are expecting to see. And if it goes anywhere, that's what, if I were, and I've said this publicly, if I was Trump's lawyers, what I'm most concerned about is actually not what he's done as president. Yeah, there are allegations of obstruction, tough cases to make. Maybe something that could be worth being brought if they brought a much bigger case, but not just obstruction. But I'd be really concerned about any financial dealings that Donald Trump had prior to the White House around the world, especially with Russia and China. And God forbid, I would never want him to be interviewed by the special counsel's office. because his track record is, if you've ever read the deposition transcripts that he's given in some of his civil cases, I don't know how you could conclude he wasn't lying. I mean, objectively, put everything aside. If you read, as a lawyer, reading through the transcripts that he had in some of his cases, it's amazing.
You know, and you brought up some points I'm going to get to a little later on about collusion, and some of the implications there. But let's talk about Papadopoulos now for a moment. We know he made a guilty plea, lying to the FBI. Now, when he was arrested, I believe it was a day after the Manfort search warrant. Whether or not that's related in time, I don't know. But if you read the way the whole thing's played out, his agreement, his arrest, it seems to me that the FBI did what we often did in mob cases, in drug cases, any enterprise case. You look for that one person who you think is going to be the weak link, someone you get to, and it seems to me they identified Papadopoulos as that guy who just has enough exposure that he wants to save himself, and I think they contacted him and they arranged this in advance, and this all kind of went as planned. Did you get the same feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Now, this was a name that publicly most of us did not know.
Right.
I mean, his name was out there, of course. Everyone who follows this has heard President Trump mention his name in newscasts when he was saying who was part of his foreign policy team. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence was aware of who he is. They were scared. They wanted to interview him. I don't think they had yet at that point. I'm not sure if they even had at this point. But he was someone on the list. But publicly, all the reporters were, of course, saying we did not expect this one. His guilty plea was not on our radar. And, it's amazing when you look at it, because, of course, the one thing he pled to was lying to the FBI. Now, what we don't know is, did they have any other charges against him that they threatened him with? All we know is that what he pled to, and why some commentators have been saying that his case is more important, frankly, at least in the Russian collusion context, than Manafort or Gates, because Papadopoulos' guilty plea goes directly to the heart of these thoughts of collusion. And at least on its face, you kind of wonder, what the heck was this guy thinking? I mean, if I recall correctly, one of the allegations or things he admitted to, was that he had lied to the FBI as to when he was part of the campaign. I mean, something as simple as that. No, I couldn't have been dealing with that because I wasn't part of the campaign yet. And they're like, yeah, yes, you were. I mean, that's easy to prove when you were part of the campaign. So, I mean, that's fascinating. Now, one of the things we don't know really with him yet is right now there's the media war from inside the White House to downplay Papadopoulos is significant. One guy called him a coffee boy,
right.
Even though he's in a meeting with
the president
and the president of the United States, and I know one of the guys actually sitting right next to him as well, and some in the room have admitted that Papadopoulos was saying that, hey, I have this direct line to Putin. Maybe, Mr. President, you should meet Putin. And the Attorney General, then just Senator, was like, no, bad idea. We're not doing that. But that doesn't matter because the conversation was had. So that is a direct link into potential Russian activities with the campaign. So, yeah, he's young. He's 30 years old. He clearly did not act in an intelligent way. I don't know who his
He was in over his head, huh? In over his head.
Yeah, went totally over his head. I don't know anything about who his lawyer is, so I don't want to say anything bad about what the hell happened. And of course, he might have acted outside of what the lawyer was telling him to do anyway. But
right.
He is an early domino to just push over to try and get bigger fish. And of course, the big $64,000 question that is out there right now that everyone is speculating on and no one knows is, he gets arrested in July. He pleads guilty, or at least is announced in October. What was going on between the end of July and the beginning of October with all the conversations that he was having and emails and phone calls and meetings with everybody, with, I don't know, whoever, tied to the campaign, and was he wired?
Right. And we don't know that, and we don't know if he got anything. But my experience, and again, if you put yourself in the mind of a prosecutor and criminal law, when I was working on the streets, you could not have someone out there very long if they were not producing. Because if you're going to use them as a witness, and time and again, I call Mark Zaid, and I can't get you to say anything, and then I call Michael Tab, and I come up blank again, and I'm coming up with nothing. With each one of those bad calls, those bad conversations that produce nothing, or worse, produce exculpatory information, he's becoming less and less credible. He's already lacks credibility because he lied to the FBI. So to keep him out there for 3 months would only hurt the prosecution, in toto. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes, and that's what I think. And again, it's speculation on people's part, so we can't say specifically in Papadopoulos' case. But what we can say is based on the experiences that I've seen and the experiences of very experienced prosecutors or criminal defense attorneys, that the scenario in this case, given the fact pattern, the timeline, would seem to indicate that he was a cooperative witness with the government in trying to obtain additional evidence of culpability of those around him. And so as soon as that indictment was, or the guilty plea, I'm sorry, was announced, you know that the first email or phone call that was being made throughout Washington, D.C., from lawyers to their clients was, did you talk to this guy in the last 2.5 months?
Right, right.
And Carter Page, who's an enjoyable character who went and had a 6 or 7 hour testimony before the House Select Committee on Intelligence, and was going on air, all without lawyers, unbelievable.
Yes.
And saying, yeah, I think I talked to Papadopoulos sometime around that point in like August or September. I think I had some emails with him.
Right.
So, okay.
And didn't Carter Page also say he spoke to Sessions about
believe so.
Right. But I was going to ask you about Carter Page later, and we're going to put up a picture in a second. But he's a bit of an odd duck, would you say? And you think he's
that would be a good description.
Yeah. Does he lack credibility just from his personality, just from the things he said and the way he said them? Or do you think, I know he spoke under oath, and we tend to give that a little more credibility, a little more credence. But, watching him, listening to him, do you think, a jury or anyone listening to him is going to say, I don't know about this guy? What do you think as a lawyer?
As a lawyer, I'm dumbfounded, just shaking my head, going, "What are you doing? Are you kidding me?" He's out of control.
Yeah, but to me, we wouldn't be very compelling. He wouldn't be a very compelling witness for the prosecution, in my opinion.
His stories are all over the place. He's got a lot of inconsistencies. Mm-hmm. I don't know what to make of him. If he were my client, I would fire him because right. I do not allow clients to conduct themselves like that. He's clearly not. He doesn't have legal counsel who accompanies him. He may have legal counsel behind the scene. The guy's worth, I'm told millions and millions of dollars. So he's certainly got lawyers on retainer. And either he's not listening to them or they're not very good lawyers. I don't know how else to phrase it. It's sort of a black and white issue. The same thing with like Michael Flynn Jr. and some of the comments that have been made publicly, essentially taunting the prosecutors. If anything that I've learned, and again, my job, I want to keep my clients from being criminally investigated or prosecuted. I've had a lot of clients criminally investigated. I've had very few clients who go from a criminal investigation to a criminal prosecution. And in large part because either they really didn't do anything wrong, criminal in the first place, but oftentimes it's because we've persuaded the government it's not the proper or necessary route to go. Just let the agency administratively look into disciplining them instead of prosecution. It's not worth it. It's not hasn't risen to that level. But with the one thing I will tell clients all the time is the last thing we want to do is do something to taunt the government on a criminal side. I do it on the civil side all the time and attack them and put pressure on them. But I don't do that with criminal prosecutors.
Well, it's funny you asked that question. Lead again, very nice segue into the next thing. Well, someone asked here, why would the FBI investigate bank issues? Is that related to Mueller's investigation? And Mark, jump in if you have something else there, but I think pretty much it's clear that Mueller was given, wide latitude in what he could investigate. And if it led somewhere else, as in any investigation, it led to banking issues or white-collar crime outside of the campaign, outside of Russian collusion, he had, blank check to do so. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, at the heart of it, the collusion isn't just the the effect of Russia that might have had on the election with respect to voting issues, because of course that didn't involve the campaign in the sense of trying to hack into the voting machines or use social media for that, but it is what involvement the campaign had with Russia with respect to emails of the DNC, of Hillary Clinton. It also had to do with any money. So part of what Mueller is also looking into is payments that were given to Russians, not necessarily by the campaign, but money that went to Facebook that might have been involved with Twitter in some way and all these fake bot accounts. So there was basically they're following the money. And I think many people probably don't realize, but those who follow it closely, I'm sure do. There are a lot of issues out there with respect to allegations of Trump involvement with Russia way before the election, way before he was even a candidate, that has to do with business. I mean, right. Trump Jr. said a few years ago, a quote that I'm sure he regrets very publicly, that they owe millions of dollars to Russian banking interests. There's been deals that they've had back and forth between the Trump organization and Russia that involves large, large sums of money. And so part of what Mueller's looking into is not just collusion in the sense of throwing the election or trying to buy the election, but an amount of influence that the Russians might have on the Trump campaign and then the Trump presidency.
Right. Now, and you said something before about you don't taunt the government. We know, or at least it's been reported, that Mueller is looking at some of Trump's finances. I think a failed bid for a hotel in Moscow. Trump, drew a line in the sand for Mueller. For the FBI. Not a good idea. And not because the FBI will prosecute you just because you annoy them, but you can't have someone draw a line in the sand and dare the FBI to cross it, and then the FBI appear to be afraid to cross that line. So when you do something like that, you lay down that, you throw down the gauntlet, law enforcement has to move forward even more aggressively because they have to make the public be aware that they're not going to be intimidated, and nobody could draw a line in the sand for them. So I think just doing that didn't help his cause either.
No, absolutely not. And I always hearken back. It's not a criminal matter, but those who are old enough to remember the 1988 presidential campaign and Gary Hart taunting the press.
Follow me.
Follow
me, man.
Follow me. Exactly. What, you think I'm having an affair? Just try and follow me. And they did. And guess what? He was having an affair. And they found out about it. Look, this president has a major issue about tweets in particular, and drawing lines in the sand that don't accomplish much here in Washington, D.C. It may work very well in the New York City international business world, but it doesn't work well in Washington, D.C. And at its heart, and I think Carter Page and Mike Flynn Jr. and some of these others, I mean, Michael Flynn is a Washington insider, but not as much with, I think, Jr., but certainly not Donald Trump Jr., that's for sure. That these guys think that they have the power that they have, which is incredible power in the financial sector. They certainly have a lot of power in the political center, but it's different power. I'm a New Yorker. I'm from there, the city area as well. It's a very different type of power when you are powerful in the New York City financial area than it is when you're here in Washington, D.C. And money is primarily the difference. You don't need a lot of money. You don't need any money, frankly, to have power in Washington, D.C. It helps, but just because you have it doesn't necessarily mean that you can sway it and intimidate the government. So just like you said, you make that argument to the government or that taunt to the government's going to come after you, not because they want to show you up, but they're going to make sure that no one thinks that they are intimidated.
Right. And I'm from New York. And, Donald Trump has always been a larger-than-life presence, always been a powerful, influential man, used to getting his way. Just life's a little different for him now. That's all. I want to show you a little picture here. Max, we show the Washington, it was the Post. picture. Let's talk about collusion. All right, and so we got there. Max, get that picture up there. It's up. Okay, you see that there?
I do.
Mark, everybody's there. Okay, that's everybody's there. We have Jared Kushner. How many times has this guy had to redo his SF-86, the disclosure?
A number of times. A number of times. Now, I've actually come a little bit to his defense. I mean, most of the comments I've made about him and his SF-86, because that's one of the things I do, almost every day, is advise people how to fill out their SF-86. And I will tell you, there's no doubt he's getting special treatment. That said, anyone in power in Washington, D.C. gets special treatment, quite frankly, up to a point when it comes to government processing, security clearances, hiring, things like that. It doesn't always last forever, and we'll see how long it lasts for Jared Kushner. But some of, both with Kushner and Sessions, who are listed right next to each other there, some of what they have gotten in trouble for publicly and criticized hasn't been as significant as some people have made it out to be. I'll give you a perfect example. The meeting that Kushner had in June of 2016 that Manfort was at and Donald Trump Jr. was at with the Russian lawyer and her team, so to speak. I don't believe, and I firmly don't believe that Jared Kushner needed to have reported that meeting on his SF-86. Based on the facts as we know them. Now, there could be facts we don't know, of course. Based on the facts we know, he only had a brief meeting with her. He supposedly never saw or talked to her again. She wasn't supposedly a government official, regardless of what that initial email to Donald Trump Jr. said. That's separate from apart as to what reality might have been. And Kushner is a little bit to the side of that. So he revealed that meeting. Actually, it's his revelation of that meeting that led to the entire meeting being told publicly, disclosed publicly, and getting Donald Trump now in somewhat hot water, as well as Manafort. But he put it on because by the time he redid his SF-86 for the second or third time, his lawyers, who actually I know and are very smart, experienced lawyers here in D.C., were basically telling him, put down everything. Put down every meeting you had with the Russians, because right now, from a political standpoint, if someone finds out about it later, it's just going to make it even worse for us. So we're going to list it all. And Jeff Sessions, as what's listed on this document here, spoke twice with the ambassador and discussed Ukraine. Now, there's two sections on the SF-86 that deal with foreign nationals. One is Section 19. That's just any contact with a foreign national, but there's specific criteria that has to be met. They have to have close and or continuing contact. You have to have influence, affection, obligation, common interests, something with that individual. That probably wouldn't apply to meeting Ambassador Kislyak twice. But Section 20b-6 says any meeting you have with a foreign government official, it doesn't matter that it was 5 minutes versus 5 hours. It doesn't matter if it was once or 500 times. It has to be placed on the form. Now, Sessions did not reveal that meeting or those meetings. His response was, well, I was told by the FBI that I didn't have to list anyone I met as part of my official senatorial duties. Now, and this is still an unanswered question, so this is something for you to investigate and get a scoop on.
All right.
The form has no exception like that. You read the form is really clear. That has no exception for congressional meetings, any official government meetings. Now, that said, agencies are allowed to narrow, limit, or expand the scope of the form. The form mostly deals with a 7-year time period. They could say, I want you to fill it out for 10 years, 15 years. Or, I don't want you to list anyone that you met in official capacity. That can absolutely be true. The problem is no one to date has confirmed that this was Justice Department or FBI policy to have done this. What I can say, I think emphatically, is I don't have any doubt whatsoever that whatever Justice Department policy is, Jeff Sessions was not an exception. There have been many congressional representatives who have become cabinet members. This is not the first time a congressional rep would fill out an SF-86 to become a cabinet member in Democratic or Republican administrations. Do they have a policy or not to say, yes, don't involve your senatorial or congressional responsibilities, because it would be a much longer report. You know, they meet with foreign nationals all the time.
Right.
So that's still an unanswered question. So I don't know, because this is significant, because if he wasn't told that exception, he committed a felony by lying on his form. I mean, we can talk about did he lie, perjure himself before Congress, which is still an open question too.
Right. And, you know, but again, I think about my time in the FBI, and I traveled overseas, you know, on behalf of the FBI. And I don't remember what the written policy was, but I know if we sat down and had a meal and someone from that country happened to sit next to us, talk to us, and sometimes we did a little mingling, that moment we were on the computer reporting that back to headquarters. Every contact we had, just because common sense dictates you're in a sensitive position, you report contact with a foreign national when you have the security clearances. And I was far from being the Attorney General.
No, absolutely. Now, you know, what I remember when I was on a CNN program, one of their analysts, who's former CIA, made the comment. He's like, look, you know, I used to meet with foreign nationals all the time. You know, sometimes, you know, we would just meet with them casually, just, you know, walking down the street, you know, you're living abroad, or, hey, you're in the Pentagon and you see so-and-so who is the military liaison from another country, and you just wave hello, John, how are you? Or Sebastian, how are you? Yeah, we should get together sometime. And they don't report it. Does that happen? Happens all the time. Absolutely. Come on. Let's have, you know, a dense dose of reality here. But does the form say that that's not reportable? No. The form doesn't distinguish between that. Now,
Right.
Is someone going
to
make
you have to use good common sense, though. Right.
Yeah, but what we're talking about with Sessions is, first of all, was he really in his senatorial capacity versus his campaign capacity? That's an open question. And then secondarily, is there a policy from the government to say, don't worry about it, Senator? And we don't have the answer to that. I suspect at some point in time, especially if it is determined he perjured himself, and I'm not saying if he did or didn't, but if it was determined or alleged by the government, you know, that the SF-86 charge may be one we see as well.
All right, let's get into the collusion. Max, you bring up that definition there. I want to talk about the FARA Act with you, the registration of being a foreign agent. We know certainly when we look at the allegation, the indictment on Manfort, the allegations against Flynn, just allegations of what we hear now. The FARA Act, the registration as a foreign agent, seems pretty obvious in what we're talking about. Really, you know, where Manfort is representing the interests of a foreign government. But let's look at the definition there, and I can't see it on my screen all that clearly, but Max, if you could throw it up here for me. It's pretty broad about what you do there. You know, it says there, can I get a copy of that? He's working on it, so I can see it also. I see that little box there. You know, in terms of working from anyone who represents a foreign government in almost any capacity. If I'm remembering correctly, it says even at the request of. Right? It doesn't talk. Okay, here it comes. Okay. First, we have the term person. That's pretty broad. Includes almost anybody. But then we say, you know, if they work for them as an agent, it means any person who acts as an agent, representative, employee, servant, or any person who acts in any other capacity at the order or request. There's nothing there about, you know, a quid pro quo remuneration, nothing like that. Would you agree? It's just very broad as to what that activity or that relation has to involve?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we say that they can't work for a foreign power. Obviously, someone under Putin's regime, in Putin's regime, would be a foreign power. A person could be anybody, and the agreement is very broad, very weak, just at the request. Then it says here they cannot engage in political activities in the interest of such the foreign principle. What's political activities? Max, can we bring that up too? And this is under, you know, the subsection 611, the definition of political activities. Let's get that on the screen there. You got that there? Okay, Mark, can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so the term political activities means any activity that the person engaging in believes will have an interest to. I'm trying to get to the, you know, cut to the heart of it here. You know, that will, any section of the public within the United States with reference to formulating, adopting, and changing the domestic or foreign policies of the United States, or in reference to any political public interests, so on and so forth. That to me is pretty broad also. again, I don't know. We can look at the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And just by the way, I'm a wannabe lawyer. I just need to point that out. Accepted to law school 3 times, went 0. So I have to do these things. But it leaves very broad. And it seems to me, if you are discussing manipulating information, even maybe illegally obtained information, trying to influence the outcome of an election to a candidate that would favor the Russia and that would be favorable to them, doesn't that seems to me to fall into the definition of working as an agent of a foreign power?
I mean, I think and imagine that the distinction would be whose interests are you representing? I mean, if there were allegations and essentially an actual prosecution going against Trump or the others surrounding him for actually cooperating or colluding with Russia, part of their argument would be they weren't representing the interests of Russia. They were representing their own self-interest, and maybe there were overlapping parallels and that they had similar interests. But, you know, to me, at least from a collusion standpoint, it's more of sort of working with, not working on behalf of. Now, you're right. I mean, anyone who reads this language, it can be interpreted very broadly. But as Manafort's lawyer pointed out, which frankly is not a good defense, it's only been applied very narrowly. Mm-hmm. I mean, he said, and I'm not doubting this is not true because I'm sure the press would have found otherwise, there's only been like 6 FARA prosecutions in the last few decades. Now, the fact of the matter is there's a number of statutes that's like the Espionage Act, which I deal with all the time, especially in classified leak prosecutions, very rarely applied. And in fact, as you said, I teach at Johns Hopkins, and in part in my class, we dealt with the Espionage Act actually just this past week. And in Stephen Kim's case, who was a State Department employee prosecuted a few years ago for leaking classified information to Fox News, one of the arguments that was made actually by Abby Lowell, who is Jared Kushner's lawyer, in fact, and Senator Menendez's lawyer, who's waiting deliberations and determination from his jury up in New Jersey. The argument was made, this is basically selective prosecution. And I'm sure you saw from your law enforcement days, that never works because the government, the prosecutors have the discretion as to whether or not to apply the law in one particular case versus another. I mean, there are grounds to argue selective prosecution as a defense, but it is virtually impossible to prevail in it. It would have to be so perverse and abusive, which maybe, for example, we've heard lots of people talk about the Logan Act, that the Logan Act has been violated, that Michael Flynn violated the Logan Act when he was talking to Ambassador Kislyak in December of last year. And the Logan Act generally paraphrases something to the effect that private citizens are not supposed to be engaged in foreign policy discussions with foreign governments. And if you read the act, you're like, damn it, that fits. And then you go, okay, it was written in, I think it was 1797, 1799, or 1790s. I may be off by 1 or 2 years, but since it was 215, 18, 19 years ago, I think I could be off by 1 or 2 years. No one has ever been prosecuted under that act. So great that it's there. No prosecutor is going to bring that as a charge against someone now, especially at that level of our government, on some statute that's never been used. That would be very selective prosecution because there's lots of people who would fall victim to it. Same thing with FARA, but FARA still, it's been deployed as a prosecutorial tool enough times that I wouldn't use that as a defense, but he's making more money than I do.
Interesting. Before I go into the kind of the last part of the show here, let's look at some of these questions. Someone asked, why is Sessions not being investigated? We don't know if he is or not, correct?
We don't know. I mean, he's certainly being looked at by his former peers in the Senate.
Mm-hmm. Right. Someone's asking, Papadopoulos is a nobody. Why hammer him? I guess the answer is because they can. If he's a way into the rest of the investigation, it's just a legitimate law enforcement tool. Would you agree with that?
He was the key to open the first door. Yeah. You go for the weakest link. You know, the chain is only as strong as the weakest link.
That's right. Fair game. Earlier, what exactly does an indictment mean for Manafort? Does this mean, what does it mean for Trump? And I think you and I addressed that. Right now, it doesn't mean anything necessarily
Right.
for Trump. Um,
Michael
would,
Flynn's
yeah.
case is going to be more problematic. You know, the big story of the last 48 hours is whether or not Michael Flynn is concerned that the special counsel's office will go after Michael Flynn Jr. and that to protect him, and I think even his wife, that somehow she must have been involved or alleged to be involved with some aspect of business. You know, whether he may flip, Michael Flynn Sr. may flip on Trump or Sessions or whoever in order to protect his family. And that's, as you know, from your law enforcement days, another very common
How
fact.
we do it, right. Everyone's got their tools. Okay, next question. How can the FBI link Manafort to Trump in this indictment? And I think you kind of answered that question. They may.
Don't.
They don't, but right here they don't. There's not. This is not an indictment of Trump in any sense. If it was,
Yeah.
it'd be some further investigation having to do with other financial ties, if they're there.
Hey,
Right.
Whitewater, which looked into a failed investment opportunity down in Arkansas, ended up with a blue dress and an impeachment of the president of the United States.
And what do you call what was the word? Whatever that means, or whatever this means.
What does
Is what
mean?
is mean? Yeah, something like that, right?
Yes.
Very technical legal question. Why not look into Trump's previous finances? And I think we've discussed that, saying that there's nothing barring the special prosecutor from doing
Nope.
that, and it looks like he is doing that in some way.
And that's what you were talking about with Trump throwing down the gauntlet, saying you better not be looking at my prior financial dealings. Well, and you might as well just telegraph, go right ahead, look at my prior financial dealings.
Right. All right, let's kind of get to the bottom line here. I mean, so many other things going on here. We have Steve Miller being interviewed, and we have Clovis having to step aside because of his ties to Russia. I mean, it all looks, there's a lot of smoke there. Certainly a lot of smoke.
There's a lot of
Get,
smoke.
yeah, it's something you and I actually talked about offline. Let's talk about the pardons. People are concerned that anything that happens, Trump could just pardon them. So my question is, one, do you think he'll do that? Do you think he'll just start handing out pardons to protect his own?
So there's two aspects to the pardon equation. One is the legal aspects, and the president has incredibly broad pardon authority. The one issue that's frankly more academic than anything else is, could he pardon himself? And it's an unanswered question. There's legal arguments on both sides. It's never had to be decided, because who in the world ever thought the president of the United States would even have to contemplate pardoning themselves? Now, so he could pardon these individuals, any number of them, including members of his family. If I remember correctly, I think Billy Carter got pardoned. I'm trying to remember whether it was Clinton who pardoned him or even his brother Jimmy Carter. That I don't remember offhand. Maybe one of your viewers will remember. But there's the political aspects of the pardon. And you know, a high crime and misdemeanor under the Constitution for impeachment grounds is not necessarily a legal term. And members of the House of Representatives and the Senate could decide that President Trump abused his pardon authority or used it for political purposes to such an extent to infuriate them that they could move forward, if they so choose, with impeachment proceedings based on pardoning. And some senators, in fact, even as I recall, in the Republican Party, I think like Senator Sass has basically said, you know, you better not pardon any of these individuals. There will be essentially retribution if you did, politically.
Interesting. And in a impeachment, if I'm correct, there is no standard of proof as in a criminal trial, you know, of reasonable doubt. So that, you know, they could just feel he did it, and that'd be grounds enough, correct?
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head how to define what the standard is, but it's certainly not beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, I don't think there is a defined standard for you know, the level of proof they have to bring forth for successful impeachment. I don't know if it is defined.
You know, and ironically, just to bring full circle, Abby Lowell, who's a key player in all this, Abby Lowell was one of the Democratic defense counsel in the Clinton impeachment hearings. So you've got someone, and I mean, he's a friend of mine. He's a great lawyer. But this is what's so, Washington, D.C. is very much a small town when it comes down to it. And that's why Trump and people like Michael Cohen, his lawyer, these New Yorkers, you know, I've been here for almost a quarter century now. I still say I'm a New Yorker. I just happen to be temporarily down in D.C. for half my life, but it is a different world down here, and these guys are starting to learn it.
Right. Now, one thing you and I talked about, being a displaced New Yorker, you don't talk like I do, though.
Being here 24 years, I've lost most of the accent.
I haven't lost mine. I've been gone for a long time, too. But anyway, Mueller, he knows that the possibility of pardons looms over him in his investigation. What is his strategy? And I asked you, offline, do you think he would defer to maybe a state prosecution? You don't think so, but he must have some strategy for working around pardons.
So I don't think he would defer, but there are some things that can be taken out of his hand. If Trump pardoned certain individuals like Manfort or whomever, or Flynn, that Mueller was targeting, Mueller essentially loses jurisdiction. But the limitation on a presidential pardon is it only applies to federal crimes.
Right.
It doesn't apply to state crimes. So as any of your viewers in New York, in the New York area know in particular, or anyone who is a student of this topic, the New York Attorney General is looking at a number of issues that involve some of these players where they purportedly have jurisdiction. So especially over financial crimes, because a lot of the financial transactions occurred through the jurisdiction of New York, whether through banks or actual deals, property deals. And so the New York Attorney General can go after any number of them. Now, that would require, in order to remove that as an option, would require a pardon by the New York governor, which obviously
not going to happen.
Andrew Cuomo's not going to be doing anytime soon.
Right. So, and we know that Mueller, or at least we believe Mueller, is working closely with the New York State Attorney General in this matter, correct?
I think it's a fair assumption. Mm-hmm. I don't know that anyone has publicly confirmed that, certainly with either office. But, I can't imagine from one law enforcement agency to another that they're not cooperating as they gather evidence that would be relevant to each other's prosecutions.
Right. And besides, I think he's got to be cognizant of the pardon issue, and he would just hate to see people escape that. So I think he would be doing that. So, Mark, I think we could agree that there's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of lying going on, a lot of spinning. There's a few flames that are starting to pop up, but we still have a long way to go in this investigation. It's far from over.
We do. Yeah. I can tell you, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary, keeps saying that, the Russia part of the investigation is almost over. It's almost over. I can tell you it's not almost over. I have clients who are meeting with the Office of Special Counsel about Russia. This is not anywhere near being over.
Right. And we can imagine that. And we all know, again, just from criminal experience, once, as you said, the first domino, once those dominoes fall in any investigation, it's just starting. As we always tell people when I speak on cases, most of the investigation occurs after the arrest. And that's when things really start to break, when people start talking and evidence starts coming in, because now we can act overtly as opposed to covertly. So we have a ways to go. All right, let's hear about the James Madison project. It sounds very exciting.
Sure. So I created this 19 years ago to focus on national security and intelligence issues. We try to educate the public about issues of overclassification and government secrecy. We primarily do conferences now and handle Freedom of Information Act lawsuits that James Madison Project, or JMP as we call it, brings in connection with journalists. So my private law firm, which is really where I do my work, represents a lot of major media outlets like USA Today, Politico, Daily Beast, used to represent the Daily Caller, Gawker, lots of journalists from the Wall Street Journal, CNN, everywhere. That we're doing a lot of FOIA litigation. The James Madison Project is working in connection with the journalists to go after documents that would reveal accountability issues. Now, we did this. People will say, "Oh, you're anti-Trump, you're anti-Republican, whatever." I formed this organization in 1998. We sued the Clinton administration numerous times, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration. I'll sue whoever the next administration is. I don't care who's in the White House. I go after them all, pros and cons, liberals and conservative, Republicans and Democrats. I represent Republican members of Congress. I represented the RNC about getting access to emails of Hillary Clinton. So that partisan politics doesn't play a role in anything that I do. Going after government officials who abuse their office do. So the other organization actually would be more of relevance to you is what is called whistleblower aid.
I was just about to ask you about that. Yes.
That we just created in September, because the James Madison Project doesn't represent people. It just represents its own interest that the board of directors creates as to what we have of interest. Whistleblower.org is the website, and a guy named John Ty and I, John was a former State Department official and a client of mine. He's a lawyer actually by training too and some practice. He was a whistleblower about NSA surveillance issues in the wake of Snowden. And he did things the right way because I made sure that he did. We never disclosed classified information. We went to the media with permission by the government to make sure we only revealed unclassified information. He did an op-ed in the Washington Post that got a lot of press about his concerns of overreaching government surveillance. And he wanted to carry that forward. So we formed this organization where we provide pro bono, or otherwise free, is the Latin term pro bono, free legal services to whistleblowers, particularly in the national security field, but doesn't have to be, who have information that they've been retaliated against. They're going to show waste, fraud, abuse, misconduct, gross mismanagement, or unlawful activities of government officials. It's happened. We've created this during the Trump administration, but hopefully we will outlast the Trump administration into whoever follows. And we'd love to go into even state and local governments and maybe even international at some point. But for now, we're focused on the federal government. We're focused inside the intelligence, law enforcement, and military communities to be precise, but we're open to anyone. We only use the most secure communication techniques. So people have to go through what's called a Tor browser, which is very encrypted. You have to download the software to do so. You have to only talk to us on Signal so that the phone calls are encrypted. You can't send us documents because we don't want anything classified. We want to make sure. We want whistleblowers to be rewarded, not punished. So we're very hopeful. We have so far actually some clients, particularly who used to be with the CIA, and we've been very outgoing and active, for example, about the pending nominee to be the Inspector General of the CIA. And he testified a couple of weeks ago, and we have notified the Congress that we believe he perjured himself in that testimony because we represent people who have filed complaints against him, and he testified he doesn't know of any complaints against him. And we believe that that's not true. So we gave all that information to the Senate, and there's been at least one major story about it, and we're waiting to see if it has any impact.
That's tremendous. So for people out there who may want to contact you, they should go to your website?
So if they're a whistleblower, go to whistleblower.org, and there are instructions there on how to communicate with us. If they're a non-whistleblower and they have some things that might come into my bailiwick, they can just go to my website at markzaid.com, Z-A-I-D, M-A-R-K-Z-A-I-D.com, and contact me if they have any national security issues, except if they're being followed by the government or aliens. Those guys, I have other lawyers for you.
Yeah, if they are, take a surveillance detection route and get them off your tail before you get there. Mark,
Yes.
you have offered a tremendous amount of insight, and you've done it with a very fair and balanced approach. I don't think anyone could argue that you took one side or the other. You just spoke from your expertise, and I want to thank you so much. I know how busy you are. Do you have any? Well, thank you. Do you have any coming up on TV that we should be aware of? Any appearances coming up?
Nothing. I appreciate saying that I don't take a political posture. I have focused every time I do this from what my legal expertise and experience is, which means I don't end up on television as often lately because everything is so politicized.
Yes, yes.
So when there's a Republican administration, I tend to be on MSNBC and CNN because that's who they want commenting. When it's a Democrat in the office, I tend to be on Fox. I never change what I'm saying. I only say what the law is and what my experience is. But they use it to, different advantages as they want to push a particular story. So right now, so much is so political that I just kind of watch and from the sidelines, and I feed the reporters behind the scenes. So there are stories that are out there that are coming from me, but I'm not the one commenting on them publicly.
Right. Well, thank you. I can see from numbers today and the questions that are still coming in. Yeah, you hit it out of the ballpark, buddy, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Anytime, Michael. Anytime.
All right.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, everybody, I don't think we could have had a better guest to speak on the issues than we had today. Fair and balanced and with a wealth of knowledge. No one wants to predict what may happen, but certainly we have to pay attention. These are important times that we watch. If there is some concern about members of our government, I say if, that there was any sort of collusion, and collusion could mean a lot of things, cooperation, working with, working on behalf of, we need to know it. So there's more to come. As you heard us say, that was only the first domino to fall. So stay tuned. And we have some more shows, exciting shows coming up. We'll be talking with the FBI case agent who brought down John Gotti. We'll be talking with an undercover agent who infiltrated the Hells Angels. We'll be talking about guns on campus. And we'll be talking about Oppo research in the next few episodes that are coming up. Please go to Facebook and like us. It helps. And please go to our Crimes and Times YouTube channel. And besides liking everything, subscribe. Please subscribe, because when we hit a certain number, we'll be able to take the show onto other platforms. Every show, our numbers are growing. The audience is participating in. I want to thank you for your continued support. We've come a long way since that first show, which had all those technical disasters. We'd love to have your questions. We'd love to have you join us. So please keep on watching. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. This is Crimes and Times. Good night.